Sami didn't just finish the Hawaii Ironman, he won it overall as an amateur. But his average training hours, genuinely, and he is the epitome of a guy that tracks everything, his average training hours were about 10.2 by memory, 10 hours a week of training. And he went under 9 hours at the Hawaii Ironman. It's not that 10 hours is the optimal training dose. It was the optimal training dose within context of his life. And it's so easy in the world of endurance sports, whether it's cycling, whether it's triathlon, there's so many things to focus on that focus gets dispersed over way too many things that may include incremental benefits, but ultimately serve to distract and dilute the focus on the really important stuff.
Welcome to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. I'm your host, Dirk Friel. In each episode, we'll sit down with industry experts to discuss coaching methodologies, the latest research, and leading tools for endurance training. Visit trainingpeaks.com for more training and coaching resources. My guest today on the CoachCast is Matt Dixon, who's founder and CEO of Purple Patch Fitness, a coaching company that caters to endurance athletes of all levels. Under his guidance, more than 1,500 Purple Patch athletes have qualified for IRONMAN World Championships. He is also an IRONMAN U master coach, a former professional triathlete, and two-time Olympic trials finalist in swimming. He has a master's degree in clinical and exercise physiology. And today, Matt and I had a great conversation where we talked a lot about balancing family, work, and training, as well as Matt's non-negotiables that both pros as well as amateur athletes need to nail. Matt Dixon, thank you so much for joining me on the CoachCast today. So excited to have you on from San Francisco is where you're at, right?
San Francisco, California, that's right, Dirk. Thanks so much for having me join.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never told you this, but I think you're the horse whisperer of triathlon or endurance coaching. I mean, it seems as if you can just get out these vibes, if you will, that get absorbed by athletes and in a different way. Sometimes, obviously, we've heard a lot of this stuff, over and over again, but the way you come across, the way you translate it into everyday terms, definitely really has helped me out in a lot of ways. And what I'm excited about discussing today is not, like I say, the X's and O's of training, the threshold efforts, the zone 2, this and that. But actually that in many ways, that's the last thing that needs to be dealt with. Everything else needs to be lined up so that X's and O's can really, make sense and count. So
yeah,
I love your methodology and what you bring to your clients, your podcasts, et cetera. Give the listeners some background into your sports background and how that led into your coaching.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the compliment, by the way. It's where do I go from there? I hope I don't let the listeners down and over the next block of time. But the only way is down from there, isn't it? But yeah, I grew up in England and I was a swimmer, actually, and which, many listeners know swimming's a pretty tough sport. A lot of training, and particularly when I was growing up, it was high volume. And so I was very lucky, got to come to the States on a swimming scholarship. Some over there aspirations to make the Olympics. I did not make the Olympics. I made the finals of the trials, but it's that one step up that I couldn't do. And my educational background was clinical physiology, so I sort of had that sort of elite swimming background coupled with education, and I got into this sport called triathlon, and I'm a wonderful example of how to do a professional triathlon career really poorly. I threw work ethic at it, had some relatively poor coaching, and I think in reflection I really ignored many of the key elements that create longitudinal success, sustained high performance. So I under-recovered, I under-fueled, I kept being told I had to get lighter and lighter and lighter rather than being stronger. And I ended up with chronic fatigue. And it was really that experience of my own failings, as well as my observations of the landscape of endurance sports at the time, late 90s into very early 2000s, that in honesty, I looked at it and thought there must be a better way. And so when I started to coach athletes, I was very ambitious. I'm a pretty competitive person. I did want to create champions ultimately, but I wanted to first ensure that my athletes didn't make the same mistakes that I had made. And I really, it was very purpose driven. I felt like I wanted to right a wrong. And now in reflection, it all seems quite crazy, because the things that I was really anchoring my methodology on is stuff now that it's like, duh, like really simple. But it was coupling the prerequisite very hard work that you must do to be successful in endurance sports with adequate recovery. And so much so I got labeled the recovery coach, and not in a positive way, by the way, but I put that on an equal pedestal to the recovery, really thinking about fueling and nutrition and making sure that you could support enough, because I was underfueled. And then the third big one, which was very, very rare at the time, and Dirk, you'll remember this, but year-round strength training. I got vilified, and I said, I really want my athletes to integrate year-round strength. And that at the time, there was a huge, like 90% of coaches saying that's a waste of time. So we were very much swimming against the current. And I have to say, back in the early days, athletes like Chris Lieto and Meredith Kessler and Jesse Thomas and Rachel Joyce that were willing to swim up against the current with me and buy into something that was really counter to the norms at the time. I really have a lot of athletes to thank, because I had this strong belief, but it really was the start of something that now I think was just timely, lucky in many ways, but was as a part of the shifting sort of relationship of what it takes to be ultimately successful in endurance sports and broader than endurance sports in life as well, I would argue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of our focus today will be discussing the time crunched athlete, if you will, managing work, life, family, and your passion for endurance sports. But it transcends also all the way up to the podium level. I mean, these foundations really are the foundation for all levels of endurance performance. And I didn't want to dig into strength right away, but it's awesome that you brought it up. I just had an experience where I was able to go to Spain and go to some cycling training camps. And this is Tour de France teams. I met with 14 different teams. They are all lifting, and they all lift year around. So this tide certainly has changed even at the top, and not enough of the age groupers are doing it, myself included, aren't doing it enough. So yeah, I love kicking off with that. Another kind of thing you throw out, claim to fame, is that you have brought over 1,500 athletes to world championship level, 70.3 Ironman, you and your company Purple Patch, and yet the average volume is 10 or 12 hours a week for those folks. And so this is the kind of the shift, right? That, how do you, right? And I think we all kind of obviously know now that can be done, but kind of digging in under and finding some of those secrets. And again, it isn't always in the X's and O's, but lining everything else up in your life that can allow for that performance to shine through. And one area you start with is finding your purpose. Again, this isn't going to the lab. This isn't finding your FTP. This isn't putting the heart rate strap on. Why do you start there in finding the purpose-driven athlete?
So I think really defining what success looks like for you, and then if you're in a coached relationship, what are we really looking to achieve, is the compass. It is the most important thing you can do. And without that, it's impossible for the coach to actually hold you to the standards that are necessary for you to be successful. And let me give you an example. Let's have two athletes, and I've got a kid right now, a young lad right now in his mid-20s that wants to compete at the professional level. Well, that's great, and if your purpose is to become the very best athlete you can be, and the goal out of that is I want to compete at the professional level, as a coach, it's my responsibility to paint the picture of what is necessary to get to that level and then define the actions out of that. and hold him to account. And so that alignment part is very, very important. On the flip side, if my goal was with another athlete, they had the goal of, I want to complete an Ironman, or I want to finish a marathon, whatever it might be, but I want to do it as a part of helping my longevity, improving my quality of life, and maybe being an inspiration to my kids, role modeling their kids. That's a different context, and you then have a different challenge to solve and fit through. So it's sort of performance within context. I think many coaches, many athletes skip straight over the purpose and go right to, I've signed up for X, I've signed up for Y. And it's very easy for miscommunication, lack of clarity, disbursement of focus to occur, and it ends up with frustration. I will just add as well, just going back to the total hours, it's true, you know, we have had a lot of success with time-starved athletes qualifying for World Championship events, and the average Ironman to sort of weekly hours, give or take. And I'm not big on total weekly hours. That's not a barometer I use so far as training success. But it is somewhere between 10 and 12 hours, depending on the athlete. But that's not to say, and I think this is very important, that's not to say that 10 hours a week is better as a total training hours than 20 hours a week. What it is, it's a spirit of how do you maximize the total training time that you can do while it remains effective. And if you have a massive amount of stresses in life from competing demands, from work, from travel, from family, from kids, etc., quite often it nets out that it could be 8, it could be 10, it could be 12 hours. But a purple patch pro athlete, were they suppressing life? And, you know, I don't coach pros anymore, but they weren't training 10 hours a week. That's really important for the listeners to understand. Like we were doing 18, 20, 22, 24, even some high responders to high volume would do more than that, sometimes 28, 30. And so it's all within context. The key is that anyone listening is you shouldn't take a total fixed training amount on a weekly basis and dump it on top of life that leads you to make really bad decisions around sleep, fueling properly, enough recovery. Because if you can layer whatever the appropriate training is every week over many, many months, then you accumulate 500 hours, then you're ready for whatever events you want to get through. So that's the context on the sort of weekly hours standpoint.
Yeah, so how about so quality over quantity? Certainly most athletes come into the sport thinking it's all about the miles, the hours. You know, what do those conversations look like at the beginning to get them off that mentality and onto the quality side of it? And you've also talked about the purpose of workouts, you know, and finding the key workouts to focus on each week, you know, and how might an athlete frame when they look at the upcoming week, what are they focusing on?
So one of my least favorite sayings is less is more, because less is not more. Okay, more is more. That's the truth of it. And it is all about the miles. It is all about the hours, but it's about the miles and hours, not this week. It's over the course of all of the months and ultimately all of the years that incrementally, when you integrate this into life, magic occurs. And so I want the key word, consistency. And you know, one of my favorite sayings is life is not a spreadsheet. Life is dirty and chaotic. It's living, it's breathing, it's expanding, it's retracting. So I think that athletes do best when they take a long-term view of saying, look, I'm looking to accumulate really effective training over many, many weeks. And so that means I need an approach where when life is really flowing and very, very busy, I can have the bravery and the framework and mechanism to maybe train a little bit less, but make it still really effective. When life ebbs a little bit, maybe the family go away and you're left alone, or maybe there's, you know, you got a day off of work, whatever it might be, you can dose training hours up. And so the way that we do that is no different than the way you just talked about the Tour de France cyclists. You talk about how you're coaching a pro athlete. Over the course of any block of work, let's just take a week of work, not every workout has the same value and importance. You should have 1, 2, or 3 workouts, no more than 3 workouts in the week that I like to say drive the performance needle, and typically the most demanding, either in terms of duration or intensity or both. So those are the ones that you protect. They're your key sessions. Everything else is a little bit like Amazon pack filler in your boxes. They're really important. There could be skill development, technique, evolution, basic resilience and cardiovascular conditioning, but that's where there's flex in the program. And those supporting sessions, if an athlete meets them as supporting sessions, it's much more likely that they're going to adhere to going easy so that you can really nail the key sessions. And secondly, you can scale either duration or intensity out of them if you've got fatigue creep or you've got too much going on. And that sort of comes back to why when I always used to get asked, how many hours a week does Tim Reed train? I don't know. I don't count that as a metric because it depends on the week. What I do know is what we're looking to achieve in each week and how that links together week after week, month after month. And so it's a shift of mindset. But that's how once an athlete gets that, it unlocks because they feel better, they show up better, and they have one magic thing, which I think is something that breeds confidence and results: performance predictability. When the bell tolls, you can step up in a predictable fashion and bring your best, either in key sessions or in races. And when you have that, that's unlocking a lot of the coaching and athletic puzzle in many ways.
Yeah, the key sessions are key.
Yes.
But, it's funny because, you need that ebb and flow, and that's a positive thing so that you aren't just doing the same pace every single workout as well.
Exactly.
And so if you can focus in on those key workouts, okay, I need to be ready for Wednesday's track or whatever workout, you can push. And I used to call them, my father wrote about breakthrough workouts. And it's like 2, 3 BT workouts a week, all in red, and focus on this. And then you back into the volume question from there. Like, well, what can you do around work and life and recovery that allows for the volume to be the filler, if you will. So what about, managing that work life, building habits? How might you work with athletes to think about structuring their week, or what are tricks you find along the way that people unlock?
I'm really glad that you use the word habits, because I think habits are really, really important. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see with athletes is they get pretty siloed with their perspective on whatever sport is important to them: triathlon, alpine skiing, or mountaineering, or marathon running, and they just think about it in terms of the training sessions. But the truth is, we live an integrated life: who we are at work, who we are with our families, who we are in our sport. And so you want to have a broader perspective. I think that, so as a baseline of it, whenever I'm coaching an athlete, whenever we're guiding an athlete, education and development of habits is as important as for a triathlete, for example, the swim, bike, and run and strength sessions. So that includes making sure that you've got a real prioritization in helping people structure pretty good consistency over good quality of sleep as much as you can. And that's not pass fail. Okay, you're going to have really poor sleep some nights. You're going to have travel across time zones. But if you can build a habit where 300 or 365 days you're having enough sleep with good enough quality, that's really good success. One of the big things is that I think endurance athletes suffer from, and let's remove the emotional component, but a lot of athletes unknowingly don't consume enough calories to support their training. And so teaching them how to adhere to habits where they're getting enough protein in, enough carbohydrates when training ramps up. Daily hydration, really good to support the immune system, cellular health, adaptations, etc. So there's a lot of building habits, but I would identify one habit that I think if every listener adopted this, no matter what methodology, no matter who's coaching this is something that's really good for everyone, that gives you something that I think is really powerful: control. It gives you greater control and a greater effectiveness. A purple patch, we call it the Sunday special. And it's because it's a very silly name that everyone can remember. But all it is a practice that on a Sunday, typically before you go into the week, you sit down no more than 20 or 30 minutes. And in order, you go through a process where first you look at all of your life commitments. So maybe, my son's name is Baxter. Maybe Baxter's got his swimming practice and flag football and he's got to go to the orthodontist, whatever it might be. So you log it in and you say, okay, this is it. I'm responsible for getting Baxter to the school bus and afternoon, or maybe it's Kelly, my wife. So you've got life organized. Then you go through and look at your work. What are the meetings? What travel do I have? You're not building agendas here. It's just a sweep to say, what am I looking to get done at work? Whether you're a teacher, whether you're a CEO, it doesn't matter. And that is an important integrated process, because then with that calendared, whether you're sketching it out on a piece of paper or putting it in Google Calendar, you then have what is left over. And what you have there is an optimization challenge. With this time left over, 8, 10, 12, 20 hours, how does my program fit into it? And I integrate my training sessions and put them on the calendar and prioritize them just as much as Baxter's orthodontist or my big leadership meeting that I'm guiding. And that process, that habit, is such an unlock. We started this with our pros, because pro athletes are like teenagers. They're always stuck in the weeds. They forget about their perspective. But as you know, Dirk, I work with a lot of C-suite executives, and they all adhere to this. It is the greatest unlock, and it is unbelievably simple. And so there's no sort of formality to it. The key is it needs to, because a lot of people will plan their training, a lot of people will plan their work. Few people actually line it up and plan it as one system. And when you adhere to that, it really does give you control. And it's such a simple thing. You do it once or twice, you bring your partners into it, and you get this magical thing called communication. And it just makes things easier. And, as I said, expectations. And it's like, I know where I need to be. And I think the last thing is every single week I do this, and the whole Purple Patch team do it. Myself and Kelly do it. Every athlete that I work with does it. So this is a universal thing. Never have I had a week flow in the way that I plan it. So it's not about checking a box then, but what it does give you is the ability to make really smart real-time decisions, because life always changes. There's always things that you don't anticipate. And so this is a great opportunity to really unlock. So that's my big habit that really helps people actually marry and get the confidence of this is the right training for my life. And it's a very, very powerful tool.
Okay, so then you go in on Monday morning with the plan A, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Things change, and then the mentality usually is making up for. So today was scheduled for the 2.5 hour whatever. I got in 40 minutes. I'm going to add time to tomorrow's 90-minute recovery ride. Right? Isn't that where that's like support question number one is like, I made up for it, or I'm going to make up for it tomorrow.
Well, the nice thing about the TrainingPeaks platform, you have this thing where you can take a workout and you can move it. It's revolutionary. And so it comes back to that hierarchy. If you look at Monday and you've designated a key session there and you show up and Monday's turning into custard, it's rather than just doing an abbreviated 40 minutes of that 2.5 hour key session, you move that key session, you can just move in a supporting one that's more, I like to use the phrase, soul filling. And that's a different thing, because now that workout, while it might be, let's make it up a 40-minute easy run, well, now I can go and do it with a different purpose in mind. It's a decompression valve on all of the other stresses of life for that day. Mm-hmm. It's still giving me muscular resilience. It's still giving me a little cardiovascular conditioning. It's still this mythical, amazing zone 2 that people talk about, but that's been around since the start of time, as you and I know. But it then saves you to move it back. And then along it, at the end of the week, when you don't just automatically dump it up. Let's say that life does turn to custard and you have missed a couple of key sessions. At the end of that week, you as the athlete or you and your coach reflect, another key trait of high performance, look back, what was good, what wasn't good. Now what do I do the week going forward? So I think it's, and that reflection, all it is getting out of the weeds. Mm-hmm. So rather than being reactive the whole time, you can become responsive, and it removes some of the fear-based. And so if you're listening and you're trying to sort of put it into the real world, it's so important to not think about every week of training as pass-fail. So if you don't check the box of every planned session, you are a failure and you're behind program. That is going to erode your confidence. Sometimes stuff happens. You don't hit every session, and that might be appropriate in the context of life, but you can make that adjustment and not just dump another workout on, and that's the value of coaching. That's where a coach should be able to say, based off of what happened, this is what we should do. And that's the magic. It's not in the specific intervals or the workouts. That's the easy part. And I will say, I think those decisions around are very human decisions of a coach-athlete relationship. I think it's really, really important.
Yeah. Well, thinking of training as not binary or pass-fail is certainly a big thing to get over. And once you get over that, you gain confidence. Because you're like, okay, I don't have to make up for today's workout tomorrow, or I missed this week's volume by 5 hours. It's like, okay, now let's reflect. And it gets back to that consistency. If that consistency is built in, instead of having it pile up and trying to make up, then you get injured, then you get sick, then you get too tired, and it all falls apart. You lose motivation, and it's all out the window, right? So that 100%. Consistency is really key. You have these non-negotiables. You've kind of covered, a lot of them already. I've seen you've written about sleep, the daily nutrition, hydration, workout fueling, post-workout fueling.
Huge thing.
What are your kind of tips there that you give folks?
Well, the origins of the non-negotiables, it's worth us just digging into that, how that came about.
Horse Whisperer comes out.
there you go. So it actually started, interestingly, back with our pro squad, our squad of professional triathletes that I was coaching. So it was probably 2009, 2010, and we sort of talked before, but the methodology back in the day was relatively polarizing. And so I was having a bit of a challenge. I was coaching each of my pro athletes as individual athletes because they are all, firstly, male and female. I was coaching both, different stages of development, different goals, so a bunch of individuals. But it was really challenging to get them to adhere to this pretty polarizing sort of methodology. And so I did, and it was a stroke of sort of accidental benefit to sort of the years ahead. And I think it was the most important thing as the catalyst for all our success with our pros is I created a pro squad. I took a team approach, which was very rare. I think there's one other sort of program that really did that and said, you're a pro squad. This is what it means. And what we did with our pros, and for listeners that remember the pros of the time, it was Chris Liedo, it was Rachel Joyce, Meredith Kessler, Tim Reed, Sam Appleton, these athletes, Jesse Thomas. We said, what it means to be a purple patch athlete is you're going to get together consistently 3 or 4 times a year for camps so that we could develop trust, understanding. And what emerged out of that was belonging, identity, support, accountability. And I set non-negotiable behaviors. And it's so easy in the world of endurance sports, whether it's cycling, whether it's triathlon, there's so many things to focus on that focus gets dispersed over way too many things that may include incremental benefits, but ultimately serve to distract and dilute the focus on the really important stuff. So I said, guys, these are our basics. And it is really simple. You're going to do strength year round. You're going to prioritize sleep. You're always going to fuel after every workout, protein and carbohydrate. because when you skip that, a cascade of things occur. You'd end up making worse eating choices, your recovery is impaired, your energy in the day is destabilized. We're always going to go really easy workouts, so we had strict limits. So they were 7 basic habits. For the pros as well, it was, you're going to keep your stuff clean. So going away to training camps, if you show up with a dirty chain, they went and cleaned it. Pet peeve. Yeah. It's like, hey, why has the amateur got a really clean bike and it's your job and yours is grungy? So we had 7 basic habits and said, okay, here's our team commitment. Once you have mastered these, we can talk about ice baths and supplements and compression socks that were trendy, whatever you want. We'll talk about adding that, but only if you have absolutely mastered these. And it became a really galvanizing impact because these were our sort of points of loyalty. Nothing complicated, eating enough calories at the right time, hydrating well, sleeping. But my promise was that if you can master these, you're 95% of the way to success. And so I think the key lesson in this was, it's very easy with the media to get pulled into adding, the new supplement, the compression boots, everything else that you can be sold. Basically, it's very easy, and there's a perception that that's what pros are doing. But most of the most successful professional athletes live a relatively mundane, repeatable existence where they obsess and aim to reduce complexity. Mm-hmm. So the most successful are the ones that can actually simplify life. So amateurs shouldn't be any different. And that's not against ice plunges or massage or anything else. It's like that. But you've got to build it on top of a foundation of really, really simple good habits. And so don't allow yourself to get distracted because we only have so much willpower and so much focus. So I think that's a bedrock of success of like, let's nail down the really important stuff first. Then if you really are sleeping well, eating well, then maybe at the right time, heat or ice or anything else that you care to think about can be added into the recipe. And I will say, I think that was the unlock. Tim Reed, when he won the World Championship in 2016, Tim, and he won't mind me saying this, had a tendency to be that big disbursement, sort of like focus on he really loved that stuff, the fine details. That year, he just obsessed on, I'm just going to keep it simple. And it wasn't just that he won the World Championships that year. I think by memory, he raced 6 or 7 times and won 5 or 6 of the races. He was just so consistent because his life was simplified. And he's now gone on to be a great coach with a lot of athletes. And I know coaches a lot of the fundamental stuff first. It's really important.
Yeah, I think about the pyramid, and the fundamentals or the foundation, but the media focuses on the top of the pyramid and the heat training, the altitude training, this supplement, this tech gadget, this recovery device, whatever. So yeah, if you don't have those fundamentals in place, the top pyramid just doesn't mean anything at all.
Doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, and you talk about stress is stress to the body. You have the family, the life, that the body doesn't know the difference. So like, how do you be aware of that is certainly something that new athletes coming to the sport don't always think about.
No, I think it's. I'm so glad you brought this up because I think it opens up a really important moment. The physiologically, hormonally, the stress is the body is an incredible mechanism. It's an amazing adaptive machine. The one area where it's not that smart is differentiating sources of stress, be it emotional stress, be it stress across time zones or travel, be it underfueled or undereaten, underhydrated, training stress, which is obviously a stressor. And so stress accumulates and the body will adapt to stress either positively or negatively. So it comes back to, so that's why the awareness is there. There is, with the emergence of all of these gadgets, I've got one of them on my finger, but whether it's Garmin or a Whoop, whether it's TSS in TrainingPeaks and other platforms and things like that. These fundamentally good things that can help on your journey. They can help give you perspective and give you some feedback to help inform your decisions. If, and this is a really big if you build the appropriate relationship with them and you understand their context. The unfortunate thing is that athletes fall into the trap of thinking that these things are going to give you the answer. So they're going to tell you whether you are ready to train or not in a binary way, whether you're going to have a good day or not. And so, and it's amazing how you're feeling. I don't know. My battery ran out on my Whoop band. That was an athlete said that to me just the other day, and I think it's a really important component. If you know Dr. Stephen Seiler, he said it best when I had a conversation with him, and he said, the athlete's flying the plane, and you have all of these metrics, power meter, heart rate, etc. That's just your heads-up display, but ultimately the athlete's flying the plane, and I think that's a really nice way of thinking about it, because you're the most valuable thing that an athlete can say to themselves, the number one action when they first get up in the morning is, how am I feeling? And just have a check-in with the inner animal. How am I feeling? Like, how does it, okay, I feel pretty good. And then look at your Aura sleep data or your whatever sleep data and your other stuff, and use that as a part of your decision-making process, but never lose touch of the inner animal all the way through the journey. I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, I often say, the subjective versus objective, and unfortunately, even within the TrainingPeaks world, we focus a lot on the objective, but yet I, as a coach, the subjective will override the objective, plan, and that takes priority first. So, the mood, the motivation, the sleep quality, certainly that stuff comes into play first, and then you back into, okay, well, what are these other metrics? I think there's a good opportune time to ask you the question, how much of your coaching is science versus art?
I think that I think it's always informed by science, and I am originally a scientist, and it is rooted in how the body responds to stimulus, and I am always doing every effort to stay on the front wave of latest research, etc. I also do think that research can't always provide the answer. Sometimes coaches are ahead of the research because some things
I say that a lot of times.
Yeah, some like coaches are. So you can't just wait and say, "Oh no, I'm peer reviewed driven." Well, that'd be great, but you would be behind the times if that was the case. So it's quite often it sort of validates the stuff that we sort of know happens, even if we don't know. With that, and much to some, against the perception that some people have, I love athletes to have power meters, heart rate monitors, wear their wearables. I really like metrics. I just don't like athletes to be shackled by that information. I want it to be liberated, and I sort of touched on that a little bit now. It's just information. So you can't deny the art of it. And I think a good practical example of that is sometimes when you're dog tired and it's anticipated because you've been loading training, it's, I've been labeled the recovery coach. Sometimes you're really tired and we anticipate it because you've been training hard. Yet you got to toughen up and you got to keep pushing through. So if that's an important component. You need to understand how to hold form under your fatigue. Sometimes you need to push through. Then you have the recovery. So there is always an art to it, and there's a gut. And I think that the only way that you can become a great scientific-driven artist, if you want to call it that, is by repeated exposure to how am I feeling, making your response, and then learning, constantly reflecting. And that's when you do get sometimes it's time to back off or it's time to push through. When I had this pro squad, my biggest litmus of whether I was really going to drive them and hit them with a spatula one day, or whether I was going to let them go a little bit lighter, would be if they're walking onto pool deck, I could see it in their eyes. I could see whether they were chatting. And if they were walking in silent, looking down at their feet, that's a pretty good signal. So is that science or art? I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, it seems that science oftentimes tries to prove the middle of the bell curve.
Yeah.
The average is this, standard deviation is this, but yet you're an individual. And so science didn't prove per se how you react to whatever stimulus, right?
Yeah.
So now obviously we're seeing AI, this and that all over the place, how does the coach, I mean, you've talked about this a bit already, but that the difference that the coach makes, and here we're, again, the art versus science, and where AI tends to be obviously very science focused. What's the value of bringing in the coaching?
Yeah. AI is a part of our lives now. It's arrived, and it is a part of the future. And any coach that turned their back on AI is going to miss a great opportunity. That's for sure. I think the question for me is, what is the role of AI within athlete development and coaching? And if you look at a Tour de France team, is there any Tour de France team or any world-class triathlete that uses an AI-driven platform to prescribe their training sessions? And I think the answer is no to that. I think where AI becomes really, really interesting is to get to answers. I almost view it as the ultimate assistant coach, like where, is it high value for me to look at your training plan, Dirk, and spend a lot of time going into all of the power files to try and draw from execution relative to intention, what you're responding really well to, flags of fatigue or flags of high response, etc., and give me the summary. That can take hours and hours and hours. And in fact, I can never do it, but a computer can really do that. Can I look across a team of Tour de France cyclists and pull out and say, hey, you should really look at, Igor and Jenny and XYZ, really pulling out that information? That's where it becomes really important. So I can't help but think a lot of how AI has been instantly done of like, let's remove the coach and let's just do this day to day. I got two challenges with it. Firstly, what's the original methodology that this AI computer really built on? That is often a black box, and that's like, okay, because it's ultimately a decision tree that comes out of that. That's one challenge. The second part of it, more broadly, is a big part of doing sport and actually success in sport is doing it with other people as a part of a community, as a part of a team. And it should be, what's that word that they always say? Fun. It should be fun. It should be. And in fact, when you're doing things as a part of a community, and I see so many athletes right now saying, oh, I've got specificity, that magic word. It sounds great. So I'm going to go and do this. And they follow programs where it's really repetitive training sessions that have limited personality, that removes them from, sorry, I can't ride with you at the weekend now because I've got to go and do this highly specific thing. Or I can't go to my master's swim because I don't know what that is, so I'm going to go and swim alone. And ultimately, joy suffers, burnout ensues, but also performance isn't as good because actually you're missing the benefit of team, support, accountability in this. And so I think that element, I'm always really curious, really open, really interested, but as it stands right now, I don't trust what's out there right now, and B, I think there's a whole bunch of unintended consequences that don't lead athletes to have the most fulfilling, broader perspective results. That would be my perspective, but I want to double underline. That doesn't mean I'm a Luddite and I don't believe in AI. So I think it's got an important role in the future.
Absolutely. Believe it's here to stay. I
Yeah.
think integrating it where it makes sense is certainly our take, and jumping to just giving it all your trust to tell you what to do tomorrow. There's a lot of blind spots currently.
Yeah.
So let's bring it to coaches to make coaches better, faster in the moment is certainly where we'll be focused. You mentioned camps as well, and that, I mean, it's not just for the pros. I mean, you have amateur camps. What does the value of the camp bring to the age groups?
Oh,
Age groups?
I think I'm going to use a word that Americans love to say, amazing and epic. And it's like, no, the universe is amazing, and Greek tragedies are epic. But I will use a word, transformative, if done really well. Let's define what camps are and are not. For me, a training camp, there's great value of going away with buddies and doing a bunch of hard training in the Appalachian Hills or wherever you might go and do it. And that's really fun, and that's a certain thing. That's kind of a training retreat. For me, a camp is a really important moment where when athletes come, and we do several a year, we put a lot of resources to them. They're high ratio of coaches to athletes, and they really are immersive and experiential is the way I call it. And what's the purpose? Yes, you go away and do some great training, but the important part is it has to be driven by education and helping people develop tools that they can take home and apply in their own training environment. So they have to leave with, in each discipline, 1, 2, or 3 things that they can go and action when they get home. So it's a very educational experience. It's actually sort of in the field learning with feedback. No, let's talk about terrain management. How can you get better speed over these rollers for relative to your fitness? How should you ride up a hill? What's your cadence? When and how should you come out of the saddle? All of these things, open water, skill environment, etc. But I think there's another layer that actually took me a few years to really appreciate. Whenever you get people out of their home environment, and they have to take on a challenge together, and you get them really out of their comfort zone. It's in a really low risk environment with a lot of support, and you challenge people where you make them step out and they do it together, something magic occurs. They're going through this shared experience, and it's so unbelievable that you can take 10, 15, 20 people that are relative strangers, and within 2 days, they're a team. And they actually help each other, support each other, and it's all different levels. You've got, pros to be and people in their 70s, each out of their own individual comfort zone, but feel like they're a part of something. That is powerful. And I always shed a tear on the last, we call it the banquet night, where we enjoy a couple of glasses of wine, have a big meal, and give out very silly awards. But it's always the connection that people make with each other. Growth occurs with their mind, and they build confidence and a little bit of a toolkit of this was a challenge, and it really helps with collaboration, community. So a lot of people have always reported of going back into their professional lives and going back into their teams in the workplace and saying, I've got a different perspective.
Yeah.
And we work with a lot of higher level business professionals, SVPs and C-suite type people, and they're like, I'm going to take these same principles to my team because it's a really powerful component. And so, yeah, these are so important. It's not just a slogfest, it's not just more, harder. Get uncomfortable, but make sure you can grow from it. That's really, for me, the power of a camp, I would say.
Yeah, and I love that camp experience of feeling like a pro,
Yeah.
and if you treat everybody like a pro, they see how it's done, you being the pro, showing them how it's done, and that transcendent, that experience of bringing it into your career also is very powerful. As I mentioned, I went to Spain last month for pro team training camps.
Yeah.
And then I get home and I'm like, wait, I didn't do this in the evening at camp. I didn't eat chips and cookies and drink beer and just watch TV. Why is that? Oh, well, we had this great empowering day and I was tired and it felt really good to read a book at 8 p.m. and fall asleep by 9. Like why can't I do that now? Well, go ahead and go do that. Stop eating the chips and cookies and the beer. Oh, so I get that camp mentality moment every so often at home because I saw how it's done, and it was and then you get through that week or however long it is and you're just like a new person, and then you're like, well, I can learn from that, bring that to, and then that helps your career, obviously, in family in so many different ways. You talk about the C-suite, how are they able to eke out these hours, and these little, I guess, nuggets are what open up the secrets for them. So any more expansion in terms of like secrets of how to manage work life and the passion for sport?
Yeah, with busy professionals, I'm always fascinated with why are they doing this. So they've got huge competing demands with their work. Obviously, they're competing, or they're operating in a high pressure environment. They've got to show up every single day for their teams. They've got to step up in terms of unpredictable external forces, whether it's market forces or anything else. And most of them have got busy lives outside of it, socially and with family and friends, etc. So they are the epitome of time starved. And yet so many, business executives take on really big challenges, whether it's climbing Everest or doing an Ironman. It doesn't matter what it is. So the question is why. And the reason I sort of come to on this is, and the proof is in the pudding, working with so many of these folks, is that it's multi-layered, but by taking on a physical challenge, not only does it provide health benefits, it's easier for them to adhere to stuff that's going to build a physical foundation. So they're more likely to think about nutrition, prioritize sleep, exercise consistently, and that boosts their energy, it boosts their cognitive function. That's all really nice, and that's incremental. And of course, accomplishment of summiting Everest or crossing the finish line gives you pride, satisfaction, and ego. But I think where the real power is, and the reason they come back for more and more and more, is that journey that they go on in parallel to their journey in work. The journey of sport is the ultimate vehicle where you are going to go through ups and downs, challenges, failures, etc. And it really fosters all of the traits of high performance. The same traits that an athlete has: commitment, perseverance and tenacity, overcoming failure and setbacks, collaboration, communication, feedback, coachability. There's this suite of traits. And it hones and polishes these traits that are not genetic, they're inside all of us. And so they see it as an essential role to have this two-way street of helping them as leaders. So that's why. So it's a complete repositioning of this thing. It's not a luxury or a bolt-on. It's an essential leadership tool. And then the one final thing that I think is really counterintuitive, and it's always the first thing, how do these people have time? It's actually a forcing agent. It forces prioritization and it forces effectiveness. Because all of us, no matter what we do, like if I think about my role at Purple Patch, I have never finished a week of work at Purple Patch and think, I got everything done. It's like, there's always a million things to get done. And so what it forces is rigorous, almost vicious prioritization. These are the things I need to get done, and these are the things that I can not procrastinate on but not do this week. And so by integrating it, it actually gives them, and this is going to sound paradoxical or almost unbelievable, it gives them time back. It unlocks effectiveness. And there's no better example. I can't help but tell the story. Many people have heard me perhaps tell the story or heard of the athlete, but the original sort of athlete of this that I work with, it was a guy called Sami Inkinen, who you might know, lives in Aspen now. I'm not sure if you know Sami. But Sami was the founder of a tech company, a real estate search engine called Trulia. And Trulia, I always joke, when Sami started to work with me, he couldn't afford my fees. He was just a tech entrepreneur. 5 years later, in the year that Trulia went public, Sami didn't just finish the Hawaii Ironman, he won it overall as an amateur. And that's like so, and obviously there's a whole story there. But his average training hours, genuinely, and he is the epitome of a guy that tracks everything, his average training hours were about 10.2 by memory, 10 hours a week of training. And he went under 9 hours at the Hawaii Ironman. Wow. It's not that 10 hours is the optimal training dose. It was the optimal training dose within context of his life. That's how you get the unlock. So he and I went on this journey together to say, how do we actually do this? And by the way that we did it is he didn't have the training capacity to do a whole bunch of zone 2. When we could, we clustered it up and went on big rides. Whenever he had that opportunity, yes, whenever he could, we would do big mileage. But because training hours shrunk, we had to do more intensity. So we did a whole bunch of very high intensity, and it served him well over the course of the ride. And we did do year-round strength training as well, by the way, within those 10 hours.
I heard a big tech bigwig on a podcast. It was a business podcast, and they actually mentioned that they're being coached, they're on TrainingPeaks, and they learned a lot from our performance management chart. And the reason was they could see how there are times in work career where you need to pedal to the metal and press it and go and push, and it's very, very difficult. But then you need that relief afterwards, and that in athletics, that relief afterwards, that recovery time period. But you're going through an overreaching period, and you just need to learn how to deal with being tired and keep pushing, as you mentioned earlier. But then followed up by that taper, that recovery after the A race, take some downtime. Same thing in career. There's times to push it, and there's times to learn. And lastly, I think it's great to end on, saying pressure builds diamonds, right?
Yeah, it is. It's, I love that. I do love the phrase, I'm not sure who coined it, but pressure is a privilege. I think pressure and the word stress is really important, because a lot of people view stress as something harmful that you need to try and reduce. And, this, another word I don't like, balance, you just talked about it of build balance over a year, but things are never in harmony. Sometimes you gotta charge at these things, but high performers, whether it's athletes, whether it's C-suite executives, they don't find stressful situations comfortable. It's not fun, but they know it's necessary for growth, because that is when you are under stress. So what we are building, whether it's through the lens of an athlete, whether it's through the lens of a really busy, time-starved executive, is we're building capacity, something that is not fixed, to meet the demands of stress. And so stress is necessary for success. And I would leave listeners with this. When have you ever had something that you've achieved that you really care about that hasn't come with some form of struggle or stress?
Yeah,
I can't think of one.
Yeah, pushing the limits and learning from it, and then you get better over time. All right, Matt, the horse whisperer, triathlete whisperer, endurance coach extraordinaire, thank you so much for being on the pod. A lot of great lessons to take away from this. Thank you so much, and hopefully see you at a race sometime this year, maybe.
Hopefully, and thank you very much, Dirk, and thanks for everyone for listening. I really, really appreciate it. Enjoyed it. What a great conversation, and a great coaches chat. Really enjoyable. Take care.
Thank you, Matt. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. Visit trainingpeaks.com for more training and coaching resources.